From the Sky News Centre, this is Paul Murray Live.
G'day, good evening. Yes, we are live on a Friday night, and how could we not be, on a day where the Prime Ministership has changed. Tonight we will talk about everything. And I don't just mean the same things as everyone else has talked about all day long, but lots of things that have started to slip through the cracks. We're going to bell the cat as history will be rewritten, and we'll also talk about just how hard it was to pry Malcolm Turnbull from office. But of course, Scott Morrison is the new Prime Minister of Australia, the 30th Prime Minister. He, of course, ascends to the leadership after a chaotic process, at best, an embarrassing exercise as the Liberal Party was ripping skin, flesh and bone and throwing it at each other, all for the amusement of the man who goes back to the pink house. Well, before I talk about Scott Morrison, and before I talk about how I think we need to process it, deal with it, and what happens next, I want to make a promise. Just one last thing about Malcolm Turnbull at the start of the show. Malcolm Turnbull, of course, is gone. The sooking performance was amazing. The finger marks left in the carpet will take a very long time to get rid of. Those poor Parliament House cleaners. This bloke played as dirty as you can imagine on the way out. Now, this will be rewritten by the press as a wonderful example of tactical genius. But what he did was held the country hostage. He held the country hostage so he could create a scenario where there was either doubt about his challenger or there was enough time for a replacement to be put in place. But just watch how the Turnbull-friendly media, who hated the idea of anyone disagreeing with the King, that if to do so on television or radio meant you were part of some giant conspiracy, when I thought we lived in a democracy where you can criticise a Prime Minister every single day, like people did about Tony Abbott, like people will about Scott Morrison. But this was punishable by colleague death, dare I say, when it comes to the media. But I will say, as I said, in the minutes after it was clear that Malcolm Turnbull was gone. To those of you who have watched this show for 10 years, for those of you who have watched this show in the lead up to the 2013 election, for those of you who were here when the spill happened in 2015, I've got a message for you. For those that have joined us in the past 10 minutes expecting some sort of spectacular dummy spit, I'm going to disappoint you. But to those that have been there for the ride, breathe out. It's over. So to Scott Morrison. Now, for those of you who were all in on Peter Dutton, who have literally by the hundreds filled our Facebook page with some pretty full-on comments, to the people who I know have flooded Talkback Radio, have vented their absolute soul, again, I just say breathe. Because here's the deal. If you think that Scott Morrison was the imperfect one, guess what? He is. There will be no perfect Prime Minister unless you want to run for Parliament. That's how it works. But what I do appreciate about the Prime Minister that we now have is that this is a Prime Minister who held up coal during question time. There's a good chance that while he will not pull out of Paris, he'll probably build a coal-fired power station, or at least be more receptive to it than the bloke who was barricading himself in the office today with wind farms. Scott Morrison is a man who understands the borders. He also understands the immigration issue that is there, and if nothing else, the best thing that Peter Dutton brought to the conversation this week was the idea about making sure that we match our infrastructure to our population. So if there is a commitment to a bigger Australia, and you know that I'm no fan of the bigger Australia, the man who told us there was such a thing as good debt and bad debt meaning borrowing money to pay for public servants and welfare, good debt being to build stuff, means that he may be more receptive to the idea that if you're going to pump people in, you've got to build stuff. And most importantly, in a political sense, this is a guy who understands electoral math. This is a guy who has a political antenna. The other bloke had an iPad that wasn't connected to much. The political antenna of Scott Morrison means that as a man who at one point was the state director of the New South Wales Liberal Party, he understands electoral math. He understands that the Liberal Party lost 1 million votes at the last election. And unlike the bloke who's gone bye-bye today, who thinks those votes are out to the left, Scott Morrison knows that there's 1 million missing to the right. Does that mean that he will go as far to the right as Peter Dutton was promising to do? No. But again, just breathe. Because I would prefer, of all of the options that existed today, and remember, if 3 people changed their vote, we'd still have Malcolm Turnbull. We now have a Prime Minister who understands the electoral reality that he faces, and the reason he won't go to an early election is because he knows he needs to change things. Because if he doesn't, the 1 million are gone for good. And when it's your job on the line, when it's your place in history, when it will be forever known whether you served for weeks, months or years as Prime Minister, you are laser focused on 1 million people who can help you get there the next time around. And finally, I thought, as an insight into the bloke, now I'm not pretending that this guy's going to be walking on water anytime soon, but I did like that when he attained the highest office in the land, when he reached his personal and professional zenith, as any person does when they become Prime Minister. And sure, it was probably from a script he's been practicing in the shower since he was 12, like any ambitious person. I love that he mentioned carers today. I love that we have someone at the top of the tree with the obvious empathy. The problems aren't just farmed out to the help. That the real caring in this country is done by friends and family. So is this a perfect Prime Minister? No. Not because he's a little too left and not enough right and a little bit this, and it's not Goldilocks, kids. This is the PM we got. Turnbull's gone, breathe out, reset. If he disappoints, we'll talk about it. When he stuffs up, we'll call him out. But he is an absolute upgrade on the dud we just flushed. Can you know what you think at any time? Hashtag PM Live, email pmlive@skynews.com.au. We've got an awful lot of people here ready to respond to what I've just said and a whole lot more. None other than Rita Panahi from the Herald Sun. Lovely to see you, mate, and the Friday show host. Welcome to the night time again on a Friday. How are you, buddy?
I'm great. I think it's been a great day. The rebuild starts today, and I'm excited. I know there's a lot of people who are angry and down and out. I think this is a fantastic day for Conservatives in Australia. And I think you've got to take that attitude, you've got to be positive, and you've got to give Morrison a chance. This is a man who is a Conservative through and through. People forget that. I find it quite amusing that the left is championing him as some moderate. This is a man who was the toughest immigration minister we've seen in a long time. He stopped the boats. He put that process in place when everybody said that wasn't even possible, that it was fanciful to think that you could stop the boats, that this issue was bigger than what Australia could do to remedy it. And he did it. And he did it against enormous resistance from segments of the media and, of course, the Senate. And he's got to be given credit for that. Yes, in the last few years, he's perhaps upset a few people, burnt a few bridges, but I genuinely believe he can rebuild that and unify the party behind him.
All right, and everyone else at the table, none other than Chris Smith, who is, of course, Radio 2GB, killing it in the middle of the day. And, of course, you can listen to him on 4BC and stations right across the country. What a day you've had, my friend.
I'm as exhausted as you look. I can imagine I can imagine how exhausted the politicians are after going through. I've never had more tangents and moving parts to a leadership coup, if you call it, or a leadership battle than that one. That beat every other leadership coup we've had in 11 years, and the strategies and the nasty tactics, and the fact that, you know, Turnbull took the Liberal Party, he kidnapped the Liberal Party for 48 hours there, while his operatives decided to build a case to make sure that they installed one of theirs. It was quite extraordinary.
Absolutely. And Stephen Conroy, who's seen many a leader come and go, well, Liberal, and he's obviously been involved in one or two on the Labor side. Of course, not at all. Stephen, in terms of embarrassing messes, how ridiculous did it get between 11 and 12:30 today for you?
Look, we set a high bar of incompetence with some of our leadership challenges, but I got to say, they cleared that bar with a foot to spare. I mean, demanding to verify signatures by phoning them to ask was a new high or low, depending on how you want to describe this. It was just literally, look, I'm afraid I'm going to have to disagree with you. Malcolm Turnbull played it brilliantly to stop the Abbott-Dutton forces. I can point to an identical situation in 2003 when Simon Crean knew that he'd lost the numbers to Kim Beazley, that the so-called Roosters, I'm not sure who they were coming in support of Beazley. He hunkered down for 24 hours, went to ground, wouldn't engage in conversation, and then announced he was standing down. And in that 24 hours, he rounded up all of his lieutenants, got them all behind Mark Latham, and by pulling that rabbit out of the hat, defeated Kim Beazley. So this was a tactic that's been used before. He did it brilliantly. It was absurd. You've got to have a petition of 43, you know, a majority. I want to see the signatures. Like, this was brilliant play by Turnbull to achieve his ends. It wasn't brilliant for the country. It wasn't brilliant for the Liberal Party, but it was a brilliant play to deliver the person he wanted to succeed him.
Hang on, has that part of your brain kicked in that
intrigued?
apparently is post-childbirth, where you forget the pain in order to go back and do it again? Did you not live through this today, Stephen, for God's sake? I mean, even honestly, like, can we wait for the Chris Ullman book to come out before we know it was the greatest thing that's ever happened? I mean, honestly...
This is the first time in 22 years I've not been in Canberra for a leadership challenge. I had the popcorn out and my feet up. It was fantastic.
Now, I'm working up to Gary Hardgrave, who would normally be the host at this time, but in the tradition of the long hello, Troy Bramston is with the Australian newspaper, and he was there front row in Canberra today. What a cluster.
Yeah, g'day, Paul. Look, it was a spectacular day in Australian politics. We've rarely seen anything like it, you know. But I've been saying all week, and I'm going to continue to say it. It's an indictment on our country that we have had. We now have our fifth Prime Minister in 5 years. We are a laughingstock internationally. We are now regarded internationally as an unstable government. Nobody knows what's going to happen next. There's no stability. There's no certainty. The business community is up in arms. The voters have had a gutful. So, you know, it's been an extraordinary sequence of events, and, you know, to see Malcolm Turnbull just hang on the way he did for so long with that series of tactical and strategic manoeuvres, which Stephen Conroy just referred to, was extraordinary. And by his actions effectively delivered the Prime Ministership to Scott Morrison. And in the Australian tomorrow, I've written that was the final victory of a dying king, and that's what it was. And the Peter Dutton forces and himself have egg on their faces tonight. I mean, I've rarely seen a politician blow themselves up more spectacularly than he did this week. I mean, he went for the Prime Ministership, he lunged for that crown, and he failed to get it. And, you know, one of the most extraordinary things, Paul, was that the Prime Minister, the former Prime Minister, Malcolm Turnbull, almost held on. 45 to 40 votes was that spill motion in the end. If 3 MPs had changed their mind, he would still be Prime Minister tonight. So that is extraordinary in itself. And there's obviously so many elements of this that are going to reverberate through the years. But I'll just make a quick point. I think the Liberal Party will recover.
Gary's getting ready to go
I don't think that this is the end of the Liberal Party or anything like that. It's been a dark day, but they will recover. And they will remain a viable political force into the future, but they've got a lot of challenges they've got to deal with in the days, weeks and months and years ahead. All
right, we've got the tuning fork out. Those reverberations will be going all up and down in this hour and the next as well. We'll get through all of it, up, down, all the rest of it. Gary Hardgrave, of course, normally hosts Hardgrave at this particular time. I appreciate you lending me the time slot.
It's like being the Country Women's Association lounge singer working with Frank Sinatra. I'm the apprentice working with the master. I'm delighted to be part of this.
The best I will accept is the bloated corpse of Elvis. But other than that...
We're in this together, Paul. It's a two-man lift. Can you follow the whole rubbish that's actually occurred the last... I mean, and look, I furiously agree with much of what Troy just said, except Prime Ministers of Australia should not be a job-sharing exercise.
It shouldn't be a hot desk.
And we shouldn't be having ourselves compared to Italy from a stability point of view. Italy used to be the country we all used to lampoon, but...
Maybe it's a tourism campaign.
Well, it could
maybe
be.
Maybe if we can be more like Italy, Rita, maybe if we can be a bit more like Italy people, it's a...
Well, you were talking about the Leaning Tower of Pisa the other night.
Well, I've just worked it out. Scott Morrison was the former tourism executive.
That's what it is.
This has been a 10-year tourism campaign,
What the bloody hell
Rita,
are you?
where we are now up there with Japan, with all of these joints that can't hold a government for 6 weeks.
Bingo campaign.
Just awful, the bingle campaign. And it is a bingle. Look, Paul, anyway, at the end of it, I want Scott Morrison to succeed because he's not Malcolm Turnbull, OK? And I do not hide for a moment my affection for and admiration for Peter Dutton. And unlike Troy, I actually believe Peter Dutton threw the hand grenade that needed to be thrown to blow this thing up. But in one way, I do agree with Troy. I think that Malcolm Turnbull's tactics of calling it on Tuesday is where Peter made his big mistake, because he actually should have not blinked. He should have actually sat there. But look, to Peter Dutton, thank you for getting rid of the worst ever Prime Minister in Australia's history. He's gone. Now, Scott Morrison has got to make sure he is not Turnbull 2.0, which, of course, as we know, is Rudd 3.0. We need to make sure that Scott Morrison actually has got the ability to change things, get rid of Paris, or at least start building some coal-fired power stations, do something about the drought, build some dams, get rid of Simon Birmingham. I mean, there are things that you can do right now, tonight, and maybe go to church on Sunday and get it right, Prime Minister. We want that to happen.
Now, Rita and Stephen, I couldn't make it out, but I was hearing the little side talk between the two of you just then. Own up to it. What was going on there? Who were you putting the little leadership shiv into then?
No, we were just discussing the Prime Minister's excellent record as New South Wales Liberal Party director and recounting his time when he was in charge of the Tourism Commission just before Fran Bailey, a Liberal Party minister, sacked him for the bingo campaign.
The shit email's gone out tonight.
If you've been around for a while,
Well, can I just tell you, BBC News tonight, BBC Radio News tonight did not mention his failure as a tourism operative. They mentioned the fact that he was a childhood television advertising star. And it actually led their bulletin tonight. This all today led their bulletin tonight over the hurricane that's about to devastate Hawaii.
Yeah.
And, of course, I've got the Sharks colours on tonight, mate. The blue, the black, the white.
Look at you reaching out across the aisle.
Well, it's what you've got to do. I mean, but, you know, mate, it is not just the million that didn't vote for them in 2016. It is also the million others who are ready not to vote for them now.
Yeah.
Because, and I'm one of them.
Yeah.
I'm one of them.
I reckon it's close to 3 million. The groundswell of hatred out there from those who would easily and normally vote for the Liberal Party, They are red hot, ready to punish.
Absolutely.
And they are going to take a lot of convincing after today from Scott Morrison to change what they still think.
They've got to change
Chris,
what they've been. They can't be Turnbull 2.0, as I said, which is Rudd 3.0.
Rita, pick Chris up if you want.
Well, I just think if he puts a team together that it does not seem like mirror image of Turnbull's team, if he gets rid of the bedwetters, the Pines, the O'Dwyers, the Ryans, and brings in some of those people that the base do trust and do admire and do see reflecting their values, I think he's got a real opportunity to bring those disenchanted voters back into the camp. And he is a Conservative. Turnbull was never a Conservative. He was in the wrong party. He could have been a great Labor leader. We don't know.
He was probably the best Labor Prime Minister we've ever had, actually.
Okay, Rita, can I just say the problem with Scott Morrison here is, and this goes back to about a month ago when we were really in the midst of arguing profusely about immigration numbers, was that he said skilled migration brings in revenue, it is positive to the government, it is positive to the country. If he goes down that track, I'm telling you, irrespective of what you think that he has on his side, that will spoil him in the eyes of those who would vote for him. I'm telling you, and that's what we know he believes. So he's got to eat humble pie, realise the people in the Shire have told him this 1,000 times, and he's got to say, that's okay. The business community and those in Treasury love more skilled migrants. That's fine. But we fight for facilities and services at hospitals and in schools. We can't get from point A to point B around our cities. We've had a gutful of that. And if he doesn't come to grips with the immigration idea, and I think he'll come to grips with coal, because he's the man, as Paul said, who brought the coal into the lower house, I think he'll come to grips with that. But if he doesn't come to grips with the number of people in people's suburbs at the moment, he's a goner.
We'll get to the city of Paris a little bit later, but Troy, again, this idea that I do think one of the absolute virtues of Scott Morrison is the understanding of electoral math. You can't get your way to the prime ministership essentially without understanding it, and certainly the difference between serving weeks and months and years is the ability to find that million votes. But the absolute truth, and again, what I'm just keep trying to say to people here is breathe, let it out, and work out that at the very least, at the top of the tree is somebody who acknowledges what the problem is rather than the person who previously was in absolute contempt of what the problem is.
Yeah, look, I think that Scott Morrison and Josh Frydenberg do need a policy reset. I mean, they've got to come up with a new vision for the government. They've got to come up with a new purpose statement. They've got to start talking about party values. And they've got to reflect that in a new and recalibrated set of policies among those key areas. And, you know, the energy, climate change issue is not going to go away. The discussion around the country on immigration is not going to go away. And the issues over school funding, particularly with Catholic schools, that's got to be resolved. So he's got to clear the decks, and then he's got to try to set out a new agenda, you know, define himself as a new Liberal leader. I mean, he said today that this is a new generation of Liberal leaders, so he's got to make that work and show us what he means by that. But internally, look, he's got to heal some divisions here, and he's got to have a look at the cabinet. And I wouldn't recommend too many changes. I mean, the idea of bringing back Tony Abbott may not be a bad one if he can be part of the team, part of the tent, and stay in the tent and support the leader. That's probably a good idea. But I just want to make a quick point about the base. You know, everyone's been talking about the base, but look, let's just get real here. I mean, any poll that's been taken of Liberal Party voters showed overwhelmingly they wanted Malcolm Turnbull to remain Prime Minister. So that may not be something that people on the right wing of politics want to hear.
Liberal Party primary vote is at 36%. Yeah. No, because the Liberal Party primary vote is in the 30s. And you know so when you've already lost those voters, they're not calling themselves Liberal voters anymore. So in the polling, they don't show up.
It's the definition of who you are.
But Rita, you talked about the base. Now 36% to me. 35% to me sounds like the base.
No,
I mean, you can't get much.
29% in Longman, Troy. 29% in Longman.
Forget the
guys.
That's who I'm talking about.
One seat in a by-election. That's what Longman was, one seat in a by-election in extraordinary circumstances. There's no doubt there's been some bleeding of the Liberal Party, National Party vote to One Nation, Liberal Democrats, Corey Bernardi, all sorts of other parties. There's been a little bit of that.
Elsewhere.
Perhaps a little bit to Labor, but Labor's primary vote is at historic lows as well. So let's just get realistic here. Just one final quick point.
No, Troy. The base exists and the base matters. Trying to pretend it doesn't exist.
Well, he's got the base. The base is 36% or more.
No.
So
I'm talking about the people who've walked away. I'm talking about the Conservatives who have walked away from the coalition and no longer see the coalition as reflecting their values. And if you don't bring those people back, you've got no chance.
But if you're getting... But if you're 49
there's like
to
more than 1 million.
But okay, guys, please.
If you're 49
Troy,
to 51% in news poll, you can win the next election.
Yeah, but the issue here is there is going to be this endless conversation about everyone trying to have their definition of the base, but the base as a term that certainly as I use it, it's there's a million calculations that go into it, right?
About the fact, I agree.
No, but about the fact that literally, you know, other column before the 2016 election was 6%, and then after it has locked in between 15 and 19% across multiple things. Those are clearly, after the million votes lost, the easy calculation to make is that there's an awful lot of those people over in other. Now, again, I'm going to repeat for the people half listening and for the people transcribing this, searching for the meltdown after dark, which is you can't build an election-winning position without a foundation.
Exactly.
No one is saying you can make, you can win on the base alone. You can't build base on base on base or foundation on foundation on foundation. And you know, Stephen Conroy, there is going to be this endless conversation about the heart and soul of it. There's a lot of hyperbole used by people to invoke their point of view. I understand that, but there is provable maths. There is provable. Go to the AEC website. 2016 tally room and have a look at it and compare it to the 2013
Let me give you the primary vote from 2016. And I appreciate Troy referring to 51-49, but let's talk about where the votes were in 2016. Liberal Nats, 42% primary. Labor, 34.7% primary. Greens, 10.2%. Other independents, 13.1%. Now, I accept the Hansen phenomena is bigger now than it was then. And that, so from 42%, the Libs only got to 50.4% to win that last election by 1 seat. Since then, you've had the redistribution, which is a disaster in the ACT and Victoria, where Labor are net up 4 seats. And you have the Hansen phenomenon eating alive the Lib Nats in Queensland. So a national 51-49, I have to disagree with Troy, does not mean that in today's situation that the Libs would win. Normally I'd agree with you, Troy, but because of the One Nation and Xenophon factors in South Australia and in Queensland, I don't think you can take the usual 51-49 is a place that the Libs can win from in this upcoming election. But the Libs know deep down that if they don't have a 4 in front of their primary vote, they can't win this next election.
And Ipsos on Monday said 33 was where it currently is. Now, Ipsos, let's give or take 1 or 2 or 3 or 4, but there's an admission but Troy, there's the basic admission that it was higher in 2013, it was lower in 2016, and according to all published polls, it's way lower in 2018, correct?
Yeah, look, I don't disagree with that. I mean, the Liberal National Party have clearly lost votes.
Okay, then that's who we're talking about.
And there's hang on a sec.
And there's been a
fracturing. And there's been a fracturing of the Conservative vote. But my point goes to this issue about the base. Now, when Julia Gillard led the Labor Party's primary vote sunk to 26%. It's never been anything like that on the other side of politics under Malcolm Turnbull. And as I say, when you ask the voters who they wanted to lead the Liberal Party, when you ask Liberal voters who they wanted to lead the Liberal Party, they overwhelmingly said Malcolm Turnbull. So I think this point about the base can be exaggerated. That is a separate question as to whether or not the government has been losing votes or whether they can win the next election.
All right, guys. Now, Chris, we're about to lose Rita. Sorry, Gary. But Chris, give me an insight into your radio station today. Last time I checked, normal human beings allowed to make phone calls. Allowed to offer dissent in the democracy.
Phone's not taken off them by the Prime Minister.
No. What? Now, I know policy things, all the rest of it, but right, what were they saying about personality that seemed to be absolutely rooted in leadership of 2015? Because at some point this has to be overcome. At some point this has to be part of someone's history but not necessarily determinant of their future.
They wanted an outright win today. Now, bear in mind, this is a Conservative radio station, and this is where I differ from Troy, because every day I take 60 calls and we believe these to be primarily Conservative voters, and they are so fed up with their own party, they don't intend to give out pamphlets, as they refused to do in 2016. They don't intend to do the work they normally would when they work for the party. That's all over and done with. They were disgusted in Malcolm Turnbull. They couldn't believe the party could go so far to the left. And I'm hearing this, bombarded by this. And this is why this whole argument about some kind of conspiracy between the Telegraph, Sky, Conservative radio stations such as 4BC and 2GB is just so wrong. We react to what our listeners tell us. We do.
Shoot the messenger stuff.
Exactly. They have bombarded us for 18 months, screwing this Liberal leader like no other Liberal leader they've ever screwed before. Vehemently. Vehemently. They just didn't like this bloke. But today, they got a little bit too carried away, because all I got told was, this was a waste of time, we haven't achieved anything.
100%
and I think
wrong message.
Exactly. Go back to the start. They removed the person that irritated them the most. They should be happy with small mercies, and it is a small mercy. Yeah. Furniture will be saved. Bill Shorten will take, unless Scott Morrison performs like an absolute hero, Bill Shorten will be our next Prime Minister. I'm convinced of that. But he won't be there for 2 terms, I don't think. And that was what the Liberal supporter has achieved today, and they should be very glad for that.
That's
Peter Dutton caused that to happen. He triggered,
absolutely.
He triggered it.
Yeah, absolutely.
People try to say it was about Dutton because he wanted to be Prime Minister. Well, everybody who goes into Parliament wants to be Prime Minister, Attorney General, Foreign Minister, Defence Minister, something like that, right? Everyone's got an ambition.
We can't pretend that wasn't what today was about.
But Peter Dutton did what he did in a self-sacrificing way, and that's the point that I think a lot of people have got to get.
Gutsy, courageous stuff. But this
really
thing,
was.
Bringing petitions from one side of the House to the other to show the Prime Minister, he really did the hard yards.
Humbling.
We're getting into the nonsense of today in a second. We're going to get to it in forensic detail, and I've got a feeling we're going to...
Is there a monkey on a roller skate?
A little bit. But Rita, before we go, final thoughts about the absurdity of today, or more importantly, to the people watching telly right now that are throwing things at the TV because I'm not angry enough. And God love Twitter, I just glanced at it.
I'll do it for you if you like.
According to the left, I'm melting down, and according to the right, I'm not angry enough. So Goldilocks here is apparently just right.
Okay. I'm not staying at your place.
I'm Paul. I can't agree with you. I'm from the left, and I'm thinking you're not angry enough.
Are you like Craig Laundy? Are you?
Just mention the NBN, mate, and then I'll blow a gasket. Rita, final thoughts, because I know you're about to hit the road.
Look, I'm very happy with what's happened today. I think the coalition supporters need to just take a deep breath. Yeah. Malcolm Turnbull was the problem, and he's gone. You may not have got your #1 candidate, but I think Morrison is a much better option than Bishop or Turnbull or any of the other candidates that you could put up at this stage. So I just think you can't have the world, and Dutton should be given full credit for having the courage to bring this to a head and get rid of a toxic Prime Minister who was just going nowhere. Yep. And I think we've got to give Morrison a chance. This is a man who is a strongly credentialed Conservative. Why do we forget that? We've all got such short memories. Forget about the last couple of years. Look at his history as a politician, and he has performed admirably over many years.
Correct. All right, we'll leave it there for you, Rita. Stephen, Troy, Chris and Gary, plenty more to fire up about. Get ready. Who's going to play the token lefty? More in a second. Thank you very much for watching, wherever you happen to be. If you want to be part of the show, you know what to do. Hashtag PM Live, email pmlive@skynews.com.au. So let's jump into a couple of things, including in its disgusting detail, the process. Because here's how it works. The media write the books. Troy, of course, will go on to write the definitive history book, but everyone else who will be bashing one out will, of course, be an inferior product endorsement, if I could ever backhander.
He wrote the forward with it.
I like the man. I love the man. I love him. I want more books, more stories on his house. The only way to do that is to build it with books. All right? That's what we do. We're here to move product, mate. It's not Channel 2. Anyway, is that... and the history will, of course, end up being written by the favoured figure in this, which, of course, is Malcolm Turnbull. And the narrative that, this giant factional dummy spit, and I've got a very interesting bit of tape I've got to show you about Malcolm Turnbull's alternative view about whether factions exist or not in the Liberal Party when they worked for him versus working against him. But I want to show you in, not real time, because it went on for about an hour, but there was, of course, the fast today of the hoops that everyone had to jump through to get this thing to happen. As you know, the 43 names had to go onto the list. The list, of course, then was seared into the brain of the man who will spend the rest of his life ripping those people's reputations or whatever else apart, because he's got nothing else to do and he's got an awful lot of ability and means to be able to do it, and plenty of mates still there in the parliament who will do some work for him. But then we had, of course, the drag-out nonsense about verifying the names and addresses and all of this nonsense. And at one point I thought the Liberal leadership spill, everyone had to dip their finger in ink.
It was the KGB.
Going to be,
it
yeah,
really was.
I thought we were going to get, full Iraq's first democratic election here. But I want to show you what happened during the day here on Sky. And as you know, marching to their own tune, this was frustration live on the air here on Sky.
Prime Minister is willing to allow this farce to worsen, for the government to suffer, I would suggest, even greater damage than it's already sustained this week.
It is just becoming an ultimate joke if it hasn't before. This has got self-interest on display on all sides, all over the place. For the one hand, Malcolm Turnbull saying, oh, no, I want to see the petition, and then the Dutton camp not handing it over. I mean, just get it done.
It's hard to explain this.
I would have said this. We are now ungoverned. This place has just absolutely undone itself. Malcolm Turnbull's making a thoroughgoing grub of himself. There's no doubt about that. And I think the fact that they're even contemplating not having a meeting is just such a farce. If they allow this to just drag on and on and on, then you can see seats falling at the next election by the minute. Like, this is crazy stuff. I do not understand how they're allowing it to happen. It is the worst case of political management I have ever seen.
It should have an hour ago, but, we finally got there, we hope.
Well, we're not there yet.
Hopefully the meeting starts. But, I mean, to be honest, whether Dutton's got the numbers or he doesn't, it is good that he's taken this step finally to break this impasse, because there needs to be a resolution to this, and maybe, just maybe the Liberal Party might change its approach and go to some written rules as opposed to convention to deal with this, because this is a joke.
If there was any endorsement for a Labor Party-style rules for when it comes to changing a Prime Minister when in government, a Labor leader when in government, it is now.
And again, well done to a team who marathoned it this week. They've been right across it, best in the business, and there was a reason the nation was watching us today, and it was because of those people and everyone else who was able to be part of the coverage. It was a pleasure to be part of it. But Stephen, again, you talked about, the masterful tactician, all the rest of it here, and I do want to engage in this properly. To the millions of people who were actually watching that today, it is excruciating, but when it is looked back on history, there will be no reference to how frustrating that was for the nation watching on as a spectacle was playing itself out in order to not just achieve the result, but also to make it as visible as possible what the dysfunction, the hurdles was put in place. And I think that, a future issue is going to be that the media is going to ignore the fact that everyone was actually watching it.
Look, I mean, it was incredibly childish. I mean, you just saw there absolute professionals literally shaking their heads in disbelief. I mean, the fact that you had to provide a majority, which meant he'd already lost the ballot, to be allowed to have a meeting was a new rule, just invented. Then there's show me the piece of paper. Then there's the no, we're not going to. Then there's, as I mentioned earlier, I'm going to now phone everybody to make sure they're secret. This is not primary school schoolyard where somebody forges somebody's signature. This is the federal Parliament of Australia. So, I mean, this was excruciatingly bad. I think Graham's comments were spot on. I mean, this demeaned Malcolm Turnbull. It demeaned the parliamentary process, and it meant that we were a laughing stock.
It's this thing also, Chris, where this is, I can just feel this is going to be one of those things I'm going to talk about for a little while, which is as I watch this being rewritten as genius, as I watch this being redefined as, again, the Dutton campaign was full of shit and this guy was going to make them earn it. Let's talk about a change in process for the Liberal Party here. I think they should. I don't think they should get to show us 43 names. I think the challenger and one person willing to endorse, i.e. 2 or 10 or some fractional percentage, that's not half. The Labor rule is too high. I don't have a problem with that because it means a Prime Minister doing what he did today can't do what he did to the country today.
I agree that they should think about it, but you know what? One thing that I do know, we're not going to get a mongrel like Malcolm Turnbull in the Parliament again. You couldn't get anyone as much of a mongrel as Malcolm Turnbull proved to be. You know, today I was actually a little bit sorry after he lost the first spill because I thought, well, he's going to get knocked over in about 24 hours. It'll happen the next night or that night. And I thought, well, he's gone really quickly. Wow, what a kick in the guts, boom, boom. But it made me really comfortable with what we've been saying about Malcolm Turnbull today because he was that ruthless, that much of a mongrel, to actually then sick his own colleague onto the Solicitor General at the same time. Like, this is never going to happen again because we won't have a non-human being like Malcolm Turnbull. And then he sits there and starts to talk about the insurgents.
Yeah.
He taught the Liberal Party how to be an insurgent.
Well, he's talking about bullies while single-handedly also saying, please give names and numbers so I can put them by my bedside for the rest
Good
of the night.
riddance, I say.
Paul, motions are moved, they're seconded, and then they're considered. Right? That's how it's done in the Parliament. That's been the way that the Liberal Party has also done it as well. One person moves it, somebody seconds it, and then they discuss it. The whole thing was the business of the party room. It wasn't the business of the media. It wasn't the business of anybody else. And Malcolm Turnbull forgot the fundamentals that the leadership of the Liberal Party is in fact a gift given by the parliamentary Liberal Party. He showed he didn't understand the base, the grassroots, the way the party structure organised. He was federal treasurer once when he was slumming it after failing on the Republic debate 20 years ago. As he was working his way through to maybe become the member for Wentworth, as it turned out. But he also showed he didn't understand the Parliamentary Liberal Party, even though he'd been a member of the Parliamentary Liberal Party since 2004.
He spat throughout his term, he spat in the face of Liberal supporters, and today he spat in the face of the Liberal Party.
Well, and
his colleagues as well, because he showed trust. He didn't show any trust.
And I'll stand it up, but there's an incredible story about how staff have been treated, by the way. We'll get to that on Monday. But Troy, I think what he absolutely exposed was he drove a truck through the rules. Whenever the word convention gets used, I understand its meaning and its importance, but in the same way that Donald Trump, hey, you're not supposed to do that because the convention says you can't. Well, the only way to make the convention something where a certain level of decency is applied is when it is turned into a rule. I'm not talking about the restrictive one that Rudd's put in place, but something that doesn't require the absurdity of today.
Paul, were we watching the same outcome here? I mean, it's frankly astonishing to see Malcolm Turnbull described as a political terrorist, the guy who was holding the country to ransom, destroying the government, trashing the Liberal Party. But hang on a minute, have we forgotten about Peter Dutton? I mean, just a few days ago, Peter Dutton lost a challenge against Malcolm Turnbull. He was the one who started this crisis. He's the one who plunged the government into chaos.
That's not true.
Of course it was. By his actions. I mean, it's just ridiculous to suggest otherwise. It's just ridiculous to suggest otherwise. Everybody knows how this thing got rolling on Monday and Tuesday. That's what actually happened here. And And what? We're supposed to be surprised that a Prime Minister tries to... we're supposed to be surprised that a Prime Minister tries to cling to power and is going to do everything he can, using the rules or not using the rules to maintain his office. I mean, that's politics, gentlemen. I mean, welcome to the 21st century. These rules were written by Machiavelli 500 years ago. And Malcolm Turnbull used them brutally and effectively and destroyed Peter Dutton's chances of taking his job.
He was half as good at attacking the Labor Party.
Look who's angling to write the book.
Let's treat the viewers with respect and analyse politics properly. That is what happened. That is what happened today. But in terms of the rules, look, I mean, yes, it was chaotic. Yes, it made Parliament dysfunctional yesterday. It made the Liberal Party dysfunctional. The government was in crisis. But, you know, the Labor Party have had similar situations before. I mean, I don't agree with Richo or with my friend Steve Conroy saying this was unprecedented. I mean, it probably was unprecedented. But, you know, when Bob Hawke and Paul Keating were fighting each other, there was a very famous caucus meeting where Paul Keating's supporters fled the building and were running to the airport and jumping into cars so they wouldn't have to have a meeting. And Bob Hawke showed up at that meeting, tried to declare his leadership vacant, but there was no challenger because Paul Keating outplayed him. But Bob Hawke was trying to use all the rules he could to try to stay in power. And eventually, Paul Keating outsmarted him. Well, Peter Dutton didn't outsmart Malcolm Turnbull.
No, he didn't.
Today.
No, you're right, Troy. But hang on a second, Troy. You're right. Peter Dutton didn't outsmart Malcolm Turnbull because Peter Dutton was starting from a position of being noble in attempting to do something for the country. Malcolm Turnbull
How can you be noble when you resign and you challenge the Prime Minister? By definition, that is an act of gross treachery and disloyalty.
Rubbish.
Let's call politics for what it is. That's exactly what it was.
You'll get the book, Gig.
Exactly
Just settle down, Troy. What really happened here was that Malcolm Turnbull showed himself to be ill-suited to be Prime Minister of Australia because he had none of the nobility. I mean, heaven help me. The base that you say is not important is right now listening to you
as the base wasn't important.
No, you
the base wanted Malcolm Turnbull to remain Prime Minister.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
All the polls showed that. Let's get some science. I mean, politics is art and science.
All you're
there was
doing
no art
here,
of politics from Peter Dutton today, and there's very little science about politics on this program.
Troy, you are simply now comparing the worst Prime Minister in history to one of the best Prime Ministers the Labor Party ever had. You are dealing with Malcolm Turnbull versus Keating and Hawke. I mean, this is just proof of why what was done this week had to be done.
Okay, now...
perfect proof.
We're going to take a break because guess what I was absolutely planning to talk about next?
What?
Did Peter Dutton ever actually have the numbers? And if he did, when did he lose them?
Yeah.
See, Troy? There's more than one topic in an hour. Quick break, back with more. Thank you very much. You're in conversation with Troy Bramston. And my dear friend Penny's just sent me a text saying that she's with you, Troy. So, mate, if you've got my mate of 20 years, you're all good. None other than Stephen Conroy, of course, the former Communications Minister who's just loving this in every direction possible. Chris Smith, of course, the afternoon host on Radio 4BC and 2GB. And Gary Hardgrave, who would normally be hosting in this slot, but is lending me the time slot this evening.
I'm yielding to greatness.
Oh, stop it. So, of course, Peter Dutton, first time around, it was called on by Malcolm Turnbull. Second time around, it, of course, came at his insistence. He lost the ballot today, 45 to 40. Scott Morrison becomes Prime Minister, and this is what the former Home Affairs Minister had to say today, and there is already a promise from Scott Morrison that he will be returned to Cabinet.
Good. I just want to say just a couple of words of congratulations to Scott Morrison and to Josh Frydenberg. Thank Malcolm Turnbull very much for his service as Prime Minister to this country, and Jill Bishop, who's been an amazing Foreign Affairs Minister and Deputy Leader of our party. My cause from here is to provide absolute loyalty to Scott Morrison to make sure that we win the election and that we defeat Bill Shorten to make sure that he's never Prime Minister. Thank you very much.
So, Gary, I don't know if it's knowable, but let's get into this here. Every protestation, every announcement, all spin, all the phone calls, all the people on the telly he was over the line.
Yep.
So when did he lose it? Or was he never over the line?
Look, he didn't do it for himself. I don't care what anyone says, and others can try and put words into my mouth, but he knew that the government was an enormous problem. We were fouling up, well, I say we, they were fouling up with the Great Barrier Reef Marine Fund, NEG, 3 to 8, NEG 8 was where I think we got to. There were enormous problems with the government. And so I think Malcolm Turnbull got whiff of the fact that there was going to be something coming. It was going to happen. And he just called it on. So I don't think Peter Dutton ever had the numbers. I think that's probably right. I don't know, but I think that's probably right. But where we got to on, we as a country got to on Tuesday morning was that Malcolm Turnbull called it on. Peter Dutton should have gone stum. He just should have stayed silent and then spent some time getting the numbers. But the trouble was, how much damage was Malcolm Turnbull going to continue to do knowing that someone was going to get him? This is cut snake stuff. This is where we got to.
But hang on, it can't go unpassed. That's a pretty phenomenal thing that we're starting to talk about here, about the idea about whether he did or didn't actually have it. That is a huge issue, Chris, because very obviously, it obviously plays to all of the tactics and all of the driving back and all the rest of it here, but when all of the urgency, everyone will obviously boost their numbers and all the rest of it, and it should, of course, be noted that 45 people voted to bring the spill on. 45 people ended up voting for Scott Morrison in the end. There is a fascinating report I'll get to in a second about how many votes Julie Bishop got. They kept that very quiet today. What do you think, though, about this idea of whether Dutton actually had it or not? Because this matters. This actually...
Yeah, I don't think he did. I think this was based on philosophy. I think it was based on a lot of hope and not much more. And if you go back about 5 months ago when ruction started to, leak out and it seemed as if, well, it may be on, but they don't have anywhere near the numbers. That was the commentary at the time. And nothing else increased. And when they were scraping to get, 30-odd, 40 signatures, 43 signatures, and you knew they had 39, and then next morning they had 40, you knew he was going to struggle. Yeah. And everyone... I listened to Ray with Andrew Bolt tonight, and he was talking about the fact that Morrison has been aiming for this and came through on the inside and had engineered it. Well, if you look at the numbers, 45 to 40 that voted for no spill, it would have to be that Scott Morrison would have been in the nose. So he was prepared for this to go back to the status quo. So how much preparation was in this? I think this was all guided by Malcolm Turnbull, and he knew that the other side did not have the numbers.
But it's that thing, Stephen, where, in these leadership contests, obviously the drama of the moment of it's on is pivotal. Does it... Obviously it matters, and it will be forensically worked out, but not forensically worked out, it'll be pulled over for a while.
It'll be in Troy's book.
We're getting to it. What's the consequence, Stephen, of bullshitting to people like that, including the idea that essentially, let's be straight up here, Matthias Cormann burnt a bridge and seemingly he was sold a pup, and he is, of course, a man of tremendous success, all the rest of it here. That is one hell of a dint.
Yeah. Look, there's 2 or 3 different but really important points that you've touched on there, Paul, and Chris as well. On Matthias, there reaches a point where the serious players have to make an assessment that it can't go on for the good of the government. I'm loyal to you, but it can't go on. I've got to go and say I think it's over for the good of the party and the government. Yep. I mean, I know that in the second Hawke-Keating challenge, Robert Ray could have dragged a couple of votes back to Bob Hawke that would have just seen Bob Hawke win the second challenge by 1 vote.